The restaurant glittered under golden lights, filled with the hum of laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the faint sound of a piano in the corner. Every table was decorated with candles and fresh roses, and every guest looked like they had stepped out of a luxury magazine. It was a Friday night at the Silver Pearl, the most expensive restaurant in the city, a place where people didn't just come to eat, they came to be seen. At a corner table near the window sat Emma Lawrence, a woman known for her money, her beauty, and her sharp tongue. She wore a red designer dress that shimmered with every move she made in diamonds that sparkled even brighter than her smile. Her friends surrounded her, 3 other women dressed just as elegantly, laughing loudly, gossiping about everything from fashion to who recently got divorced. Emma loved being the center of attention. She lived for the whispers that followed her wherever she went. "Did you see your shoes?" one of her friends, Clara, whispered, pretending to hide her laughter. "Probably fake." Emma smirked, sipping her champagne. "Darling, some people will always try to look rich. But you can always tell who truly is." Her tone was full of pride. She looked around the restaurant, her eyes landing on the waitstaff, especially one young woman who was quietly setting a nearby table. The waitress's name was Lena. She wore the restaurant's black uniform, neat but simple, her hair tied in a bun. Her eyes were soft but tired, and her smile, though gentle, carried a quiet strength. She moved with grace, balancing trays and serving dishes with practiced care. When she approached Emma's table, she greeted them politely. "Good evening, ladies. Would you like to start with something to drink?" Emma barely looked up. "We already have champagne." "Try to keep up, dear." Lena nodded politely, unbothered by the tone. "Of course, ma'am. Would you like me to recommend something for dinner?" Emma leaned back, smirking. "Oh, you recommend things now? How cute. Tell me, do you even know how to pronounce half the dishes here?" Her friends burst into laughter. Lena's face stayed calm, though her hands tightened around her notepad. "Yes, ma'am. I've worked here for a long time." "Well," Emma said, lifting an eyebrow, "maybe next time you should work somewhere where people actually care about your opinion." She handed the menu back carelessly, the paper brushing against Lena's hand. Lena didn't respond. She simply wrote down their order with a quiet thank you and walked away. As she moved through the restaurant, the other waiters nodded to her respectfully. She was known for being kind, for helping new staff learn, for covering extra shifts without complaint. But tonight, the laughter at that corner table followed her like a shadow. At another table across the room, a man sat alone, watching silently. He was dressed in a dark suit, his face calm but unreadable. His eyes, however, followed every move, especially Lena's. His name was David King. To the world, he was a quiet businessman, but in truth, he was a billionaire. Few people knew who he really was. He liked to blend in, to see how the world treated people when no one was looking. And right now, he was watching his wife, Lena. She didn't know he was there. She thought he was working late. He often came to see her secretly, proud of how she lived so humbly despite his wealth. They had agreed to keep their marriage private because Lena wanted to be respected for who she was, not for who she married. From his corner, David's jaw tightened slightly as he saw Emma's behavior. He didn't move, but his eyes turned cold. Back at the table, Emma was in full storytelling mode. "You know," she said loudly, making sure people nearby could hear, "some people just aren't meant for this kind of life. They belong behind counters, not in front of them." Her friends laughed again, feeding her ego. One of them added, "I mean, look at that waitress. She's sweet, but she'll never understand real class." Lena returned to serve their appetizers. She placed the plates carefully in front of them, one by one. But when she reached Emma, the woman suddenly moved her arm, and a glass of red wine spilled, splashing right onto Emma's bright red dress. A small gasp rippled through the restaurant. Emma froze, staring at the stain in disbelief. Then her face twisted in rage. "You ruined my dress," she shouted. Lena stepped back quickly. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry, it was an accident." Don't you dare talk back to me." Emma stood up, her voice sharp enough to cut through the music. People turned to watch. "Do you have any idea how much this dress costs?" "More than your entire salary for a year, I bet." Lena's cheeks flushed red. She tried to explain again, her voice trembling but steady. "Ma'am, I truly didn't mean." Before she could finish, Emma grabbed the edge of Lena's apron and tore it. The sound of ripping fabric echoed through the room. Gasps filled the air. "You'll learn to be careful next time," Emma hissed. For a moment, everything went silent. The other guests stared, some shocked, others whispering. Emma stood proudly, brushing imaginary dust off her dress as if she had just taught someone a lesson. Lena stood frozen, eyes wide, holding what was left of her torn apron. Her hands shook, but she didn't cry. Slowly, she straightened her shoulders, took a deep breath, and said quietly, "I'm sorry, ma'am. I hope your evening gets better." Then she turned and walked away. That calmness, the grace in the face of humiliation, made the entire restaurant fall silent. Even Emma's friends didn't know what to say. For the first time, Emma felt a flicker of unease, though she quickly pushed it away. From across the room, David watched every second. His hands were clenched on the table, his jaw tight. The pianist had stopped playing, and the air felt heavier. The manager rushed to Lena, whispering apologies, but she only smiled faintly and said, "It's fine. Please don't make a scene." David stood up quietly, leaving a thick envelope on his table. The waiter who came to collect it found it filled with cash, and a note that read, "For the dignity she never lost." As David walked out into the cool night air, his mind raced. He could feel anger boiling beneath his calm surface, not because of the insult, but because of how easily people showed their true selves when they thought someone was beneath them. Inside, Emma was laughing again, though her voice was shakier now. "Can you believe her?" she said. "Acting like she did nothing wrong. The nerve of some people." Her friends forced awkward smiles, not sure what to say. The laughter didn't sound as confident as before. A few tables away, people were whispering, shaking their heads in disapproval. But Emma didn't notice, or didn't care. Meanwhile, Lena stepped into the kitchen, removed her torn apron, and leaned against the counter. For a few seconds, she closed her eyes, letting out a slow breath. One of her coworkers asked softly, "Are you okay?" Lena smiled faintly. "Yes. It's just a dress. I'm fine." But her voice trembled at the edges. When her shift ended, she walked home in silence. The streets were quiet, and the cool air brushed against her face. Her thoughts wandered back to the restaurant, the laughter, the shame, the way everyone had stared. But what hurt most was not the tearing of her apron. It was the way someone could look at another person and see only status, not soul. She reached her small apartment and unlocked the door. The lights were off, but she saw a note on the table. It said, "Dinner is waiting. I got home early." She smiled tiredly and walked into the kitchen, finding David there, serving food like nothing had happened. He looked at her, reading the exhaustion in her eyes. "Tough night?" he asked softly. She nodded. "Just the usual." He smiled gently, not pressing for details. "Well, eat first. You'll feel better." As she sat down, he looked at her for a long moment and said quietly, "You know, sometimes people reveal who they really are when they think no one's watching." Lena looked up, confused, but he only smiled faintly. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Nothing," he said, his tone calm but filled with something deeper. "Just that you handled whatever happened tonight with more grace than most people could." She smiled a little, not realizing that he already knew everything. Outside, the city lights glowed, unaware that tonight, a small act of cruelty had been witnessed by someone powerful enough to change everything. The night felt calm, but beneath it, something had begun to stir. And soon, the world that had laughed at a waitress would learn just how powerful kindness could be when the truth finally walked in. The morning sun slipped through the curtains of the small apartment, touching Lena's tired face. She had barely slept. Her mind kept replaying last night, the laughter, the wine spilling, the sound of her apron tearing. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Emma's proud face and heard her sharp words echoing in her ears. But Lena wasn't angry. She was just sad. Sad that people still believed money gave them the right to humiliate others. In the kitchen, David was already awake, sipping coffee and reading the newspaper. He looked calm, but his eyes told another story. He had seen everything last night. Every insult. Every cruel laugh. Every tear Lena had held back. He smiled softly when Lena walked in. "Morning, love," he said. "Morning," she replied, forcing a small smile. She tied her hair back and started making breakfast. David watched her move, graceful as always, never complaining, never bitter. "How was work?" he asked, pretending not to know. "Busy," she said quietly. "Some people were difficult." He nodded slowly. "I can imagine." Then he added, "But you handled it, right?" Lena looked at him and smiled, though her eyes were tired. "I always do." David's chest tightened. He admired her strength more than anything. Most people, after what happened, would have shouted back or quit on the spot. But Lena chose dignity over anger. And that's exactly why he fell in love with her. After breakfast, Lena left for her morning shift. When the door closed, David set his cup down. His calm expression faded, replaced by cold determination. He walked into his home office, a simple space with a large window overlooking the city. His phone buzzed as he sat down. It was his assistant, Ryan. "Good morning, sir," Ryan said. "You left early from the Silver Pearl last night. Everything okay?" David's voice was quiet but sharp. "Do me a favor, Ryan. Find me the owner's contact information for that restaurant. And also, send someone to pull any public videos or photos taken there last night." There was a pause on the other end. "Right away, sir." "Should I ask why?" "No questions," David replied. "Just do it." By afternoon, Ryan had delivered everything, the restaurant's management file, and something else, a video that had already started spreading online. David played it once. It was grainy phone footage, but clear enough. He saw Lena standing there, calm and quiet, while Emma shouted and tore her apron. The comments below the post were exploding, some calling Lena a saint, others calling Emma heartless. David leaned back in his chair, eyes cold. "So, she wanted attention," he murmured. "Now she'll get it." He clicked on another file, the guest list from the restaurant that night. There it was, Emma Lawrence, wife of Charles Lawrence, one of the investors in King Global, David's own company. A slow, knowing smile touched his lips. Fate had made things easy. That evening, when Lena came home, David was gentle again. He didn't mention the video or Emma. Instead, he made her tea and asked her to rest. He knew she didn't want sympathy. She only wanted peace. But peace wasn't what Emma deserved. The next morning, David arrived at his corporate building. The massive glass tower carried his name, King Global Enterprises. Inside, employees greeted him with respect, unaware that their calm, soft-spoken CEO was planning something personal. Ryan entered the office carrying a folder. "Sir, I've found everything you asked for. Emma Lawrence is the wife of Charles Lawrence. He handles a small portion of our West Coast investments." David nodded. "Good. Is there any upcoming event where they'll be present?" Ryan flipped through his notes. "Yes, sir. There's the annual charity gala next week. The Lawrences are regular guests." "Perfect," David said. Make sure Lena is also there. Quietly. She'll be helping with the arrangements for the charity fund. Ryan blinked. You want Mrs. King to work the event? David looked at him with a calm smile. She prefers to stay simple. Don't tell her anything yet. I want everything to happen naturally. Ryan hesitated, then nodded. Understood, sir. When Ryan left, David stared out the window, thinking. His reflection stared back, calm, composed, but beneath the surface was a storm. He wasn't a man of revenge. He didn't believe in anger. But this wasn't about rage, it was about justice. About teaching a lesson in humility without ever raising his voice. That night, Lena sat beside him on the couch. She had a cup of tea in her hands, her eyes soft with thought. David, she said quietly, do you think people ever change? He looked at her, surprised. What do you mean? She hesitated. The woman from last night, she was so full of hate. I wonder if someone like that can ever learn to be kind. David smiled gently. Sometimes people need to be shown what kindness really looks like. And sometimes life does that for them. Lena nodded, still thinking. Maybe you're right. I just wish people would treat each other better. He touched her hand. You did your part, Lena. You didn't let her take away your dignity. She smiled faintly. That's all I had left. David's chest ached at her words. He leaned over and kissed her forehead. You have more than you think. Meanwhile, across the city, Emma Lawrence sat in her mansion surrounded by beauty products and shopping bags, but her mood was sour. Her social media had exploded overnight. The video from the restaurant was everywhere. Emma Lawrence humiliates waitress, one headline read. Rich woman's cruel act caught on camera, said another. Her phone kept buzzing with messages, some from friends, some from people she hadn't heard from in years. Many were not kind. Her husband, Charles, paced the living room. Emma, what were you thinking? That video is everywhere. My investors have been calling me all morning. Emma rolled her eyes. Oh please, Charles, it was nothing. People are overreacting. She was just a waitress. Charles stopped and looked at her, frustration on his face. That waitress, as you call her, made you look like a monster. Do you have any idea how this could affect us? One of our biggest partners is already asking questions. Emma frowned. Who? He sighed. King Global. David King's company. They don't tolerate public scandals. If they pull out, we're done. Emma's expression changed instantly. Wait. David King? The billionaire? Yes, Charles snapped. And rumor has it he's taking a personal interest in this story. So maybe try not to destroy what's left of our reputation. Emma felt a cold shiver. Billionaires didn't get involved in small drama. If he cared, that meant something deeper was coming. But she brushed off the thought. It'll blow over, she said, though her voice didn't sound as sure as before. Days passed. The story kept spreading. Lena continued working quietly, unaware that her life was about to change. She noticed the stares from customers, some kind, some pitying. But she didn't let it bother her. She focused on her job, on staying kind. David, however, was busy preparing for the gala. Everything had to be perfect. The guest list was long, the cameras were ready, and the media would cover the event. He made sure Lena was included as part of the organizing committee, something she often volunteered for without knowing who the guests were. A week later, the night of the gala arrived. The ballroom sparkled with chandeliers, and the red carpet was rolled out. Guests arrived in expensive cars, posing for photographers. Emma stepped out of her limousine, smiling proudly, her husband following behind. She was determined to reclaim her public image, to remind everyone she was still the queen of luxury. What she didn't know was that this night would be her undoing. Inside, David stood near the entrance, shaking hands with guests, his calm presence commanding quiet respect. No one knew his plan except him. And somewhere behind the stage, Lena was arranging decorations, unaware that her husband's eyes were on her again, not with secrecy this time, but with pride and purpose. The pieces were in place. The story that began with humiliation was about to turn. And soon, the woman who mocked a waitress would stand face to face with the truth she could never buy, the truth that the waitress she insulted was the wife of the billionaire she came to impress. The room glowed with laughter and elegance, but in the air hung something heavier, unseen, the calm before the storm. Morning light spilled into David King's office as the city buzzed far below. His building stood tall and silent, wrapped in glass that reflected the sunrise. He sat at his desk, scrolling through the video again, the same one of Lena's humiliation. Every time he watched it, his calm expression darkened a little more. He wasn't a man of anger, but something about the way Emma had looked down on Lena burned in him like a quiet fire. Ryan entered with his usual notebook and coffee. "Sir, everything's ready for the gala next week. The press list, the investors, the guest seating, all confirmed." David nodded. "And the Lawrences?" "They'll be there," Ryan said. "Mr. and Mrs. Lawrence confirmed yesterday. They're hoping to use the event to clean up their image." David smiled faintly, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "Good. Let them try." Ryan hesitated. "Sir, are you sure you want Mrs. King involved? If she finds out who's coming..." "She won't," David interrupted softly. "Lena believes she's helping with the charity program. Let her think that. She doesn't need to know until it happens." Ryan nodded and left, though he couldn't shake the chill in his chest. He had worked for David for years and had rarely seen him this cold. There was no shouting, no threats, only quiet control. That was what made it terrifying. Across the city, Lena was at the charity office, helping pack donation boxes for single mothers. She smiled at the volunteers, her heart light despite the memories of that awful night. Helping others always healed her. When the event manager approached and said, "Lena, we'd love for you to assist with the King Foundation Gala next week," she agreed without hesitation. She had no idea it was David's silent plan unfolding. Days passed quickly. The city prepared for the grand event. Invitations were printed in gold foil, the hotel ballroom decorated in white and silver, flowers arriving by the truckload. The air itself seemed to hum with anticipation. Meanwhile, in her mansion, Emma Lawrence tried to fix her public image. She spent hours with stylists, publicists, and even her lawyer. "I just need people to forget that stupid video," she complained. Her husband, Charles, sighed. "Emma, you don't understand. People don't forget that easily. David King is known for his moral image. If he speaks against us, it's over." Emma frowned. "I'll talk to him at the gala. I'll make a good impression. You'll see." Charles looked doubtful but said nothing. The night before the gala, David sat on the balcony of his penthouse, staring at the city lights. Lena joined him quietly, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "You've been thinking a lot lately," she said softly. He smiled gently. "Just work. Big event tomorrow." She nodded. "I'm helping too. They asked me to manage the guest tables." David's eyes glimmered. "That's wonderful. You'll be perfect." She laughed softly. "I'm not sure about perfect. I'm just glad to help." He looked at her for a long moment, his chest full of pride and something else, sorrow. "Lena," he said quietly, "if you ever find yourself in a room full of people who once hurt you, promise me one thing." She tilted her head. "What?" "Hold your head high," he said. "You don't need to say a word. Just let them see who you are." Lena smiled, not understanding the full meaning of his words. "I'll remember that." The next evening arrived. The ballroom of the Grand Royal Hotel glowed with chandeliers and golden light. Cameras flashed as celebrities, politicians, and business tycoons stepped onto the red carpet. Waiters moved gracefully with trays of champagne. The charity banners shimmered with the name King Global Foundation. Emma and Charles arrived in style, a silver car, photographers surrounding them, Emma smiling confidently as if the past week's scandal had never happened. Her diamond earrings sparkled, her gown flowing behind her like a cloud. She had rehearsed her charm for this night. Inside, David greeted guests politely. Everyone admired him, the perfect gentleman, calm and elegant. But behind that smile, his eyes were sharp, searching. He was waiting for the right moment. Lena was busy near the stage, arranging name cards and table numbers, unaware that Emma was already in the room. Her simple black dress made her look modest, yet graceful. People often smiled at her without even knowing who she was. She had that quiet warmth that drew others in. Across the hall, Emma was talking loudly to a group of guests. "It's such a shame how the media twists everything. That video was taken out of context. People love drama, you know?" The guests nodded politely, though some exchanged uneasy glances. The story had spread too far to be forgotten. And then, as fate would have it, Emma's gaze fell on a familiar face across the room. Her laughter stopped. She blinked, squinting. It was the waitress. For a second, she thought her mind was playing tricks. But no, it was her. The same woman she had insulted, now standing confidently among the event staff, arranging elegant centerpieces. Emma's lips curved into a smirk. "Well, look who's here," she whispered to herself. "Some people really can't move up, can they?" Her friend beside her asked, "Who is she?" Emma chuckled softly. "Just a waitress I met at the Silver Pearl. Poor thing doesn't seem to know when she's out of place." They both laughed quietly, unaware that David, standing a few steps behind, had heard every word. His eyes turned cold again. He didn't say anything, not yet. As the guests took their seats, the host stepped on stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the King Foundation Annual Charity Gala. Tonight, we celebrate kindness, unity, and the power of giving back." Applause filled the room. Emma sat with her chin high, pretending to enjoy the event, though her eyes occasionally drifted toward Lena, still irritated that she was even here. Then came the moment of surprise. The host's voice rose again, "And now, please welcome our honorable guest, the man who built this foundation from the ground up, Mr. David King." Everyone clapped loudly as David walked to the stage, smiling calmly. Cameras flashed. The spotlight followed him. Emma clapped politely, whispering to her husband, "Finally, the man of the night." David reached the microphone and began to speak in his composed voice. "Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we celebrate not just wealth, but the humanity behind it. True greatness comes not from how much we own, but from how much we give." The crowd nodded, impressed as always. But David's eyes slowly shifted to one side of the room, directly toward Emma. "And sometimes," he continued, "life reminds us that kindness costs nothing, but arrogance can cost everything." A murmur spread through the guests. Emma felt her stomach twist, though she didn't know why. David smiled faintly. "Before we continue, I'd like to introduce someone special to me, someone who reminds me every day what true strength looks like." He extended his hand toward the side stage. The lights followed. Lena looked confused as everyone turned toward her. The host smiled and whispered, "Go on." Slowly, she stepped forward, unsure why she was being called. David met her halfway, taking her hand gently. "Everyone," he said, his voice strong but warm, "this is my wife, Lena King." The entire ballroom gasped. A wave of shock rolled through the crowd like thunder. Cameras flashed wildly. Emma froze in her seat. Her face went pale, her mouth open in disbelief. "The waitress," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "She's his wife?" David looked directly at her now, calm, unblinking. "Some of you may recognize her," he said. "She's been serving and helping quietly, never asking for attention. But kindness doesn't need an audience. It just needs heart." The audience erupted into applause, some standing. Emma sat stiffly, her heart pounding in her chest, realizing the full weight of what she had done. Charles leaned close, whispering harshly, "What did you do, Emma?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her eyes were locked on Lena, the woman she had called just a waitress, now standing under golden light, her husband the billionaire she had hoped to impress. The humiliation was silent but crushing. David turned back to the crowd. "Let tonight remind us, respect should never depend on someone's clothes, job, or status. It should come from the heart." The applause grew louder. Cameras zoomed in. Emma felt the world tilt around her. Lena, still stunned, looked at David with tears in her eyes. He only smiled softly and whispered, "Now they see who you truly are." Emma lowered her gaze, trembling. For the first time in her life, she had no words. And as the applause echoed around her, she realized the same truth David already knew, that no amount of wealth could hide the ugliness of arrogance once the light of truth found it. The ballroom glowed with golden chandeliers, their light dancing across polished marble floors. The air was filled with soft violin music and the faint aroma of roses. Everyone in the city's elite circle had gathered for the annual charity gala, a night of elegance, money, and influence. Reporters snapped pictures, and guests smiled for the cameras, their laughter echoing through the hall. It was a night for the rich to show their generosity, and for the powerful to remind others just how powerful they were. Emma entered the room in a long silver gown that shimmered with every step. Heads turned as she walked confidently, her diamond earrings catching the light. She loved attention, it gave her power. Her husband, Richard, followed behind, greeting other businessmen with fake smiles. Emma looked around the room proudly, knowing everyone saw her as one of the most stylish women in the city. But across the room, something made her freeze. Standing near the serving tables, arranging champagne glasses, was the same waitress, Lena. For a brief moment, Emma's eyes narrowed in disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me," she whispered to her friend, Laura. "That same poor girl is here again. Some people never rise, do they?" Laura laughed quietly, whispering back, "Maybe she's just comfortable being invisible." Lena tried to ignore them. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the glasses. She had not expected to see Emma again. This event was supposed to be just another catering job, she didn't know the guest list. She took a deep breath, reminding herself to stay calm. David had told her earlier that morning that he might stop by, but she didn't know in what capacity. She looked around but didn't see him yet. Meanwhile, Emma continued to whisper cruel things, each one cutting deeper than the last. "Look at her," she said. "Still wearing that dull black uniform. Maybe she's addicted to being bossed around." Her laughter carried just far enough for Lena to hear. Lena lowered her eyes, hiding the sadness that flickered across her face. The lights suddenly dimmed, and the host walked up to the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed, "tonight, we gather to celebrate kindness, generosity, and the spirit of giving. But before we begin, please welcome one of our most respected sponsors, Mr. David King." The crowd began to clap as a tall man in a tailored suit stepped forward. His calm confidence silenced the room. Emma's smile froze. The name sounded familiar, David King, the billionaire CEO who owned multiple companies across the city. She whispered to her husband, "Isn't that the man you've been trying to meet for months?" Richard nodded eagerly, "Yes, he's the one. If we can get his investment, our company could grow twice as fast." As David reached the stage, his eyes scanned the crowd. For a brief second, they landed on Lena. She looked up, surprised. He gave her a soft, reassuring smile, one that only she could recognize. Her heart skipped a beat. She had no idea why he was here or what he planned, but seeing him made her feel safe again. Emma, on the other hand, straightened her shoulders and tried to appear composed. She whispered to her husband, "We have to talk to him tonight. Make sure he remembers us." Richard nodded, completely unaware that the man they were desperate to impress was the same man whose wife Emma had insulted days ago. After his short welcome speech, David mingled with guests, shaking hands and smiling politely. People surrounded him, investors, journalists, and celebrities, all eager to get a moment of his time. Emma couldn't wait any longer. She walked confidently across the floor, pulling her husband along. "Mr. King," she said sweetly, her voice dripping with charm, "it's such an honor to finally meet you." David turned toward her slowly. His expression was calm but unreadable. "Good evening," he said. "And you are?" Emma gave her most dazzling smile. "Emma Lewis. My husband and I are great admirers of your work. We were hoping to discuss a potential partnership." David nodded politely. "Ah, Mr. Lewis. Yes, I've heard your name before." He glanced briefly at Emma, his eyes cold and sharp for just a moment. "And you, Mrs. Lewis, you seem familiar." Emma's heartbeat quickened. Familiar? Could he have seen that video that went viral? She tried to laugh it off. "Oh, I doubt that, Mr. King. I don't move in circles as big as yours." David smiled faintly. "Sometimes the smallest circles make the biggest impressions." His tone was polite, but there was a quiet edge beneath his words. Lena watched the scene from across the room, her mind racing. She could see David's calm but firm expression. He was clearly testing Emma, but how? The music continued softly as waiters moved around serving drinks. Emma didn't notice, but several people nearby had begun whispering. The viral video of her humiliating the waitress had started spreading through the guests' phones that very evening. David gestured toward the main table. "Please, enjoy the evening," he said, walking away before Emma could say another word. Richard frowned, confused. That didn't go as planned. Emma forced a laugh, though her hands were slightly shaking. "It's fine," she said, "he's just busy. I'll talk to him again later." But inside, she felt uneasy. The way he looked at her, calm, knowing, it made her uncomfortable. An hour later, as guests began to take their seats for dinner, the host's voice came over the microphone again. "Before we start our main course," he said, "we'd like to recognize tonight's honorary guests, the couple whose generosity made this event possible. Please welcome Mr. David King and his lovely wife." The hall erupted in applause. Emma clapped politely, still curious about who the wife was. But when David took the stage, he reached his hand out to someone standing near the entrance, someone in a simple black dress who walked gracefully toward him. Lena. The entire room went silent as Lena joined David on stage, her eyes soft but steady. Emma's jaw dropped. The color drained from her face. The same waitress she had insulted, mocked, and humiliated was standing beside the billionaire she had been desperate to impress. David took the microphone. "Tonight," he began, his voice calm but firm, "we celebrate kindness and compassion. But more than that, we remind ourselves that true worth isn't measured by money, but by the way we treat people, especially those we think are below us." Emma's hand trembled. The words hit her like a thunderbolt. David continued, "My wife, Lena King, understands this better than anyone. She once worked in places where people often forgot that respect has no price tag." Lena's eyes met Emma's for a brief moment. There was no anger in them, only quiet strength. Emma's chest tightened. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table. Everyone around her began whispering. Her friends looked at her in shock, some even in disgust. David smiled and gestured for the crowd to applaud his wife. The room filled with clapping, cheers, and flashes of cameras. Emma wanted to disappear. Her world, her pride, crumbled right there in front of everyone. She had no idea that this was only the beginning of her downfall. The hall was still filled with applause as David and Lena stood together on the stage, their hands gently intertwined. The golden light from the chandeliers seemed to surround them, making the moment feel almost unreal. People whispered, some gasping softly, as realization spread like wildfire across the ballroom. The humble waitress from the viral video was the billionaire's wife. Emma sat frozen at her table, her face pale and her smile gone. Her mind spun wildly, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. She could feel every stare, every whisper directed at her. Her throat tightened as embarrassment and fear wrapped around her like chains. Her husband, Richard, leaned closer and whispered, "Emma, that's his wife? The same woman?" She couldn't answer. Her lips trembled, her pride shattering into 1,000 pieces. David looked over the crowd, his calm but powerful voice echoing through the speakers. "My wife," he said, "is one of the strongest people I know. She taught me that true grace comes not from the clothes we wear, but from the kindness we show when no one is watching." The words hit Emma like cold water. Every syllable reminded her of that night, the spilled wine, her cruel laughter, and the way she had torn Lena's apron apart to humiliate her. The memory flashed before her eyes, and for the first time, she felt ashamed, deeply and painfully ashamed. Lena stood quietly beside David, her expression calm and composed. She didn't look triumphant or angry, she looked peaceful, almost sad. She wasn't there for revenge, she was there as proof that dignity never fades, even when others try to destroy it. David continued, "I've always believed that money can build businesses, but respect builds humanity. Some people forget that the way you treat a stranger says more about you than any luxury you own." There was a heavy silence in the room. No one moved. Every eye turned to Emma's table. Some people were recording discreetly, their phones held low. Others whispered her name, shaking their heads. Emma's friend Laura leaned toward her and whispered harshly, "People are watching. Try to smile." But Emma couldn't. Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Then David smiled faintly and looked directly at Emma. "And sometimes," he said, his voice softer now but edged with truth, "life gives us a mirror, not to shame us, but to show us who we've become." His gaze lingered for just a second before turning away. Emma looked down, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Tears welled up, but she refused to let them fall. She had never felt smaller in her entire life. After the speech, the music returned, slow and elegant, but the room felt different. The mood had shifted. People now looked at Lena with admiration, whispering about her story, her strength, her grace. Photographers asked for pictures, and reporters began typing headlines on their phones. Emma and Richard sat in awkward silence. Richard finally spoke, his voice low but full of frustration. "You ruined everything, Emma. Do you have any idea what this means? We humiliated his wife. Do you think he'll ever do business with us now?" Emma tried to speak, but her voice cracked. I didn't know who she was." Richard shook his head. "That's the point. You never care who people are unless they're important to you." He stood up and walked away, leaving her alone at the table as eyes followed him. Across the room, David and Lena mingled with guests. Lena felt a strange mix of emotions, pride, sadness, and relief. She had faced her pain with dignity, and now, standing beside her husband, she finally felt seen for who she was, not just what people assumed. A woman approached Lena and said softly, "I saw that video online. I'm so sorry for what happened to you. The way you handled it tonight, it was beautiful." Lena smiled gently. "Thank you," she replied. Sometimes silence speaks louder than anger. As the night went on, David and Lena shared a quiet dance. The crowd watched, the billionaire and the woman who had once been mocked now standing as symbols of humility and love. Their movements were graceful, but what touched people most was the sincerity in their eyes, a love built not on money, but on respect. Emma stayed in her seat, watching them. Every second felt like a punishment. The room that once admired her now looked through her. The luxury she flaunted suddenly felt meaningless. Her expensive jewelry felt heavy, her gown suffocating. She glanced at the exit but couldn't move. It was as if her pride had glued her to her chair. When the dance ended, David led Lena off the floor. They passed by Emma's table. David didn't say anything, but Lena paused. She looked at Emma, not with anger, not with revenge, but with quiet understanding. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Lena gave her a small, kind nod and walked away. That single gesture broke something inside Emma. Tears spilled from her eyes, silent and hot. She covered her face with her hands as the whispers grew louder. For the first time in her life, she wished she could disappear, not because she'd been caught, but because she finally saw the truth about herself. Outside the ballroom, flashes from reporters' cameras lit up the night. The story of the billionaire's wife who was once mocked by a socialite spread like wildfire. The waitress who won the night, one headline read. Another said, kindness outshines wealth. Inside, Emma stood alone in the corner, trembling. The pride that once made her feel powerful now left her empty. For years she had believed she was above others, tonight proved how wrong she was. And deep down, she knew this moment would follow her forever. But the story wasn't over yet. The world had seen her downfall, but what would she do next? Would she hide, or would she finally learn what true grace meant? The night after the gala was cold and silent. Rain fell softly against the tall glass windows of Emma's mansion, blurring the city lights outside. She sat alone in her living room, still wearing the same silver gown from the event. Her makeup was smudged, her hair tangled, and her eyes swollen from crying. The echo of David's speech replayed in her head like a haunting melody. True grace comes not from the clothes we wear, but from the kindness we show when no one is watching. Her phone buzzed endlessly on the table. News notifications, messages, social media tags, all saying the same thing. Her name was everywhere, but not in the way she wanted. Headlines screamed across every platform, arrogant socialite humiliates waitress, turns out she's a billionaire's wife. Videos of the restaurant scene and the gala reveal had gone viral overnight. Millions of people were commenting, calling her cruel, heartless, fake. Emma stared at the screen until her vision blurred. She had always lived for attention, but this was different. This was exposure. This was shame. Her husband, Richard, walked in, still in his tuxedo. His face was tired and angry. "Do you even realize what you've done?" he said sharply. Emma didn't answer. "Our investors pulled out this morning," he continued. "David King has cut all ties with our company. He was our biggest potential partner, and now he won't even take my calls." Emma turned to him slowly. "I didn't mean to." Richard slammed his fist on the table. "You never mean to. You just act superior to everyone, and now it's destroyed us." His voice cracked with frustration. "I might lose my job because of your pride." Tears filled Emma's eyes again. "Please, Richard, I'll fix it." "Fix it?" He laughed bitterly. "How? You think an apology can erase millions of views and headlines?" He shook his head and walked away. "You've embarrassed me, Emma. You've embarrassed yourself. Maybe now you'll understand that money doesn't buy respect." He left the room, the sound of his footsteps echoing down the hall until the house fell silent again. Emma sank into the couch, her sobs breaking the quiet. She had never felt this kind of pain, the pain of realizing she was the villain in her own story. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Lena sat by the window of her modest but warm home. She looked out at the same rain, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. David was beside her, reading emails on his tablet. The glow from the screen reflected on his calm face. Lena spoke softly, do you think she's okay? David looked up. Emma? Lena nodded. She looked lost. David sighed. Sometimes people need to fall to understand how high they've been pretending to stand. He reached for her hand. You didn't deserve what she did, Lena. But the way you handled it. I'm proud of you. Lena smiled faintly. I didn't do it for revenge. I just wanted her to see that kindness doesn't make you weak. David squeezed her hand. And you showed her that perfectly. They sat quietly for a moment, listening to the rain. It wasn't victory they felt, it was peace. The storm that had once humiliated Lena had finally passed. The next morning, the world kept talking. Social media was filled with comparisons, quotes, and endless discussions. People praised Lena's calm strength, calling her the graceful billionaire's wife. Meanwhile, Emma's name became a warning, a symbol of pride gone wrong. She didn't leave her house for days. Curtains drawn, phone off, world shut out. But no matter how much she tried to hide, the whispers found her. Former friends stopped calling. Her social circle disowned her. The same people who once laughed at her jokes now mocked her behind her back. One morning, she finally turned on the TV. A talk show host was discussing the viral story. They played the clip of her tearing Lena's apron, followed by David's speech about kindness. Then they showed a new segment, Lena launching a charity fund for single mothers and waitresses. Emma watched as Lena smiled on camera, speaking humbly about forgiveness and helping others. Sometimes, Lena said softly, we hurt people without realizing how much it costs them. But forgiveness is the only way to stop the cycle of cruelty. Emma's eyes filled with tears again. For the first time, she didn't cry out of humiliation, she cried out of regret. She realized Lena had every reason to hate her, yet she didn't. Instead, she forgave, and that made Emma's guilt even heavier. Later that week, Richard packed a suitcase. I'm staying with my brother for a while, he said coldly. I need time to think. Emma didn't stop him. She just nodded, too broken to argue. She watched him walk away, the sound of the door closing echoing through the empty mansion. That night, she walked through her large, silent house, looking at the expensive paintings and golden furniture. Everything she had ever wanted was there, except peace. The wealth that once made her feel powerful now felt meaningless. She stood before the mirror, touching the reflection of her own face. Who have I become? She whispered. The woman staring back at her didn't look proud or strong. She looked lost, fragile, and deeply alone. In the reflection, she remembered Lena's calm eyes, eyes that held no hatred, only quiet wisdom. Emma took a deep breath. I need to make this right, she said softly. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a socialite or a celebrity. She felt human, painfully, truly human. Outside, the rain began to slow. The clouds parted just enough for the moonlight to shine through. Emma stared at it for a long moment and whispered, tomorrow. I'll find her. And somewhere in the city, Lena and David sat together, unaware that the woman who once mocked her was about to take the first step toward redemption. The storm had broken her pride, but maybe, just maybe, it could rebuild her soul. The morning sun crept gently through Emma's curtains, casting soft light across her tired face. She had barely slept. Her thoughts ran in circles all night, every cruel word she had said, every arrogant smile she had given, every moment she had hurt someone who didn't deserve it. The images played in her head like an endless film she couldn't pause. Her mansion felt colder than ever. The silence was heavy, broken only by the ticking of the grand clock in the hallway. The housekeeper had quit 2 days ago, and even the staff she once ordered around with pride refused to return. Emma stood by the window, staring out at the gray city below. The woman she had become frightened her. After hours of staring at her reflection, she made a decision, one she never thought she would make. She picked up her phone and searched for Lena King's charity foundation. A location appeared on the screen: the Grace Home Project, a charity for single mothers and restaurant workers. She grabbed her coat and left. No makeup, no designer bag, no jewelry, just Emma, stripped of the image she had built for herself. When she arrived at the foundation's small office, the building looked simple but welcoming. Children's laughter echoed from one of the rooms, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee drifted through the hall. Emma felt her chest tighten. This was the same woman she had called just a waitress. And yet, Lena had built something far more meaningful than all her parties and wealth combined. At the reception desk, a young volunteer smiled warmly. "Good morning, ma'am. Are you here to donate or volunteer?" Emma hesitated. I'm here to see Mrs. King. Lena King." The volunteer nodded. "One moment, please." She walked away to make a call, and Emma's palms began to sweat. Her heart raced. Part of her wanted to turn around and run, but something deeper kept her rooted to the floor. Moments later, Lena appeared from the hallway. She wore a plain white blouse and jeans, her hair tied loosely. There was no makeup, no jewels, yet she glowed with quiet confidence. When her eyes met Emma's, she paused. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. The air felt heavy between them. Emma finally whispered, "Lena. I needed to see you." Lena nodded slowly. "I thought you might come someday." Her voice was calm, not angry, just sincere. "Please, sit." They sat across from each other in a small meeting room. The walls were decorated with photos of families the charity had helped, women smiling, children laughing. Emma stared at them, guilt twisting inside her. "I don't even know where to start," Emma said, her voice trembling. "I've said terrible things. I've done worse. I thought I was above everyone. But after that night, I saw who I really was." Lena listened quietly, her hands folded on the table. Emma continued, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You had every reason to humiliate me back, but you didn't. You stood there with grace. You made me see how ugly I'd become." Lena took a deep breath. "Emma, I was hurt that day, yes. But I realized something: people hurt others when they're hurting inside. I saw anger in your eyes, not evil. Just emptiness." Emma wiped her eyes quickly. "I was empty," she admitted. "I thought money made me better. I thought respect was something I could buy. But I've lost everything: my friends, my husband, my dignity. And I deserved it." Lena's gaze softened. "Maybe. But sometimes losing everything is how we finally see what truly matters." Emma looked up, her voice barely a whisper. "Can you ever forgive me?" For a few seconds, the room was silent. Then Lena nodded slowly. "I already have." Emma's eyes widened. You have?" Lena smiled faintly. "Forgiveness isn't for others, it's for yourself. Holding on to anger would only make me like the person you used to be. I had to let it go." Emma covered her face with her hands, crying silently. For the first time, her tears were not out of shame, but out of relief. When she looked up again, Lena stood and offered her a handkerchief. "If you truly want to make it right," she said softly, "help someone who needs it. Not for an apology, but to prove you've changed." Emma nodded slowly, her voice steady now. "I will. I don't want to be that person again." Lena gave a small smile. "Then don't be. Start with kindness. It's never too late to rewrite your story." They stood there for a moment, two women who had once stood on opposite sides of pride and pain, now sharing something much deeper: understanding. As Emma walked out of the building, the sun broke through the clouds. The city looked brighter, cleaner, alive. For the first time in a long while, she felt light, not because her problems had vanished, but because she finally saw a way forward. That night, Emma went home and opened her laptop. Instead of checking social media, she began drafting a letter, not to the press, not to defend herself, but to the people she had hurt. A public apology. The next day, the letter went viral. It wasn't filled with excuses, only truth. I used to believe that power came from wealth and beauty. But I was wrong. True power comes from humility and kindness. I'm sorry to every person I've disrespected. I hope one day, I can prove that I've changed. The comment section was full of mixed reactions, some harsh, some forgiving, but Emma didn't care. For the first time, she didn't need the world's approval. Meanwhile, Lena read the letter quietly from her office. A small, proud smile appeared on her face. "She's learning," she said softly. David looked up from his desk. "Maybe people can change after all." Lena nodded. Everyone deserves a second chance. And somewhere across the city, Emma looked out her window at the sunrise, a new day, a new beginning, and whispered, "Thank you, Lena." She didn't know what her future would look like, but she knew one thing for sure: for the first time, she wasn't pretending to be someone else. She was finally ready to be human. Weeks passed, and the city slowly moved on from the viral scandal that had once dominated every headline. But for Emma, the echoes of that night still lingered, not as shame anymore, but as a reminder of how far she had fallen and how far she had come since then. Her public apology had reached millions. Some people mocked her, others forgave her, but what mattered most was that she finally felt free from the heavy armor of pride she had worn for years. She had stopped chasing approval, and for the first time, she began to understand what peace felt like. She sold her expensive jewelry and donated the money to Lena's charity. Then, quietly and without cameras, she began volunteering there every weekend. No designer clothes, no reporters, no filters, just simple work. Washing dishes, serving food, listening to the stories of women who had once been invisible to her. At first, people were shocked to see her. Some whispered, others avoided her. But as days turned into weeks, their eyes softened. She didn't complain, didn't act superior, she simply worked, learning the small lessons of humility that luxury had once stolen from her. One afternoon, while sorting clothes in the donation room, Emma looked up and saw Lena standing by the door. She smiled gently. "You didn't have to come," Emma said, brushing the dust off her hands. Lena stepped closer. "I wanted to see how you were doing." Emma chuckled quietly. "I'm learning how to fold shirts properly." "That's a start." Lena laughed softly, then her voice turned kind. "You've changed a lot." Emma's eyes warmed. "You taught me that change isn't about what you lose. It's about what you find after everything falls apart." The two women walked outside together, watching the children play near the garden. The air was fresh, filled with laughter and hope, something Emma hadn't felt in years. Lena spoke softly, "You know, I didn't build this place because I wanted to prove anything. I built it because I know what it feels like to be looked down on. To be unseen." Emma nodded slowly. "And I know what it feels like to be blind, to have everything, but see nothing." For a moment, they both stood in silence. The sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the world in warm shades of gold and orange. The past no longer hung between them like a shadow, it had become a bridge. That evening, as Lena prepared to leave, she turned to Emma and said, "You don't owe me anything anymore. But promise me something, keep helping others. That's the only way to stay free." Emma nodded. "I promise." Days later, a news outlet published a new headline that surprised everyone. "Former socialite turns volunteer, from scandal to service." The article showed photos of Emma serving food and smiling beside children. But unlike her past pictures, there was no posing, no pretending, just genuine warmth. The same internet that once shamed her now called her story a symbol of change and redemption. When David saw the article, he smiled and handed it to Lena. "Looks like you changed more than one life," he said. Lena looked at the photo of Emma and shook her head gently. No, she replied. She changed herself. I just showed her the mirror. A few weeks later, Emma was invited to speak at a charity event, the same kind of elegant gathering where her downfall had begun. She hesitated at first, but Lena encouraged her to go. Maybe it's time your story helps someone else, she said. So Emma went. Standing at the same kind of stage where she had once been humiliated, she looked out over the crowd, not with pride this time, but with honesty. She took a breath and said, "A few months ago, I was the woman who believed kindness was weakness. I laughed at people I thought were beneath me. But life showed me that true strength doesn't come from power, it comes from humility. And sometimes, the person you look down on might be the one who lifts you back up." The room was silent, moved by her sincerity. Some people clapped, others cried. Emma smiled softly, feeling the weight of her past lift completely for the first time. After the event, Lena and David came up to her. "You did well," Lena said warmly. Emma smiled back. "I just spoke the truth." They stood together for a moment, three people connected not by wealth or status, but by the lessons life had taught them. As the night ended, Emma looked around at the glittering chandeliers, the same kind of luxury that once blinded her, but this time, it didn't dazzle her anymore. She had found something far more beautiful. She stepped outside into the cool night air. The city lights shimmered below like stars. She whispered to herself, kindness never loses its shine. And somewhere deep inside, she knew, this was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of a new one. A story not of arrogance, but of awakening. A story not of wealth, but of worth. A story that proved one simple truth. Respect costs nothing, but it changes everything.